Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at the Battlefield 6 open beta using the RTX 5090. We're using the MSI Gaming X Trio version of the 5090, 32 gigabytes of GDDR7 video memory. We're playing on the latest NVIDIA drivers and pairing with 64 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM clocked at 6,000 megatransfers per second and a 9800X 3D. So essentially the top of the line setup. Potentially, though, we may see some CPU bottlenecking. Battlefield does have a tendency to be a bit of a CPU-heavy game with all the destructibility and the number of players and things like that. So a 9950X3D might net you some gains that would require side-by-side testing, which we're not going to do today. But this is, if not the highest tier setup, very, very close to the highest possible tier setup that you could possibly have in Battlefield. We will also be using this DLSS developer option to enable our overlay here. This will allow us to see what exactly the DLSS model is being used in this game. Let's hop in. All right, so here in the settings, we're going to start off here at 1080p. As far as our settings go, I do have to say I don't love the way the menu's laid out. I don't love these little buttons here to kind of go back and forth. There's only two presets. There's balanced and there's performance. So we're going to go into custom here, and for graphics quality, we'll set this to custom as well, and then let's hop in, and we're on a 5090. We're starting off here at 1080p. So obviously you can see, one representation of our video memory here. We should be able to crank every single setting. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to be playing at max settings here. As far as our actual video settings, we have a few different options. So there's different anti-aliasing options. There's off, which especially at 1080p I wouldn't recommend, but we will check it out just to see how bad it is. And then we have TAA, and then we have also DLAA. And when we turn on DLAA, you can kind of see our overlay down here. I believe this uses the transform model. I think that's a K over there that we're saying. We'll see if that's more visible later on. We'll start off at off here. So this is just raw native 1080p, everything maxed out. It also does have multi-frame generation support, which is pretty nice, as well as reflex support. So this is just completely maxed out 1080p settings without I guess the only thing that maybe would constitute it not being max settings is just not having anti-aliasing on. So I imagine that we will definitely be in a CPU bound scenario here, but we'll jump in and we'll take a look. So jumping in here, we'll go ahead and load in. This is, from what I can tell, one of the larger maps here. So we'll go ahead and begin counting. And it does seem to be that we are in a CPU bound scenario here. Not super CPU bound, but definitely our GPU utilization sitting in the high 80s, even in the 70s at times, seems to indicate this is indeed going to be, reliant on our CPU is what's kind of causing the performance. Our performance rather is reliant on our CPU. So, looking here, you can definitely see the lack of anti-aliasing is certainly prevalent here as you look at like some of this wire, things like that, some of these more fine details. Certainly it seems to be pretty obvious that we are certainly in need of that anti-aliasing. From my experience, the larger maps actually seem to be less CPU dependent than the smaller maps, and I'm not actually 100% sure why that is. I imagine that maybe it could be something like, smaller maps, they still have like, this is Conquest in 32v32 mode, so when we play 32v32, we have the same number of players and vehicles and all that sort of stuff, but in a more confined space, leading to a slightly more CPU bound scenario, as opposed to here where we still have all of that stuff going on, but we're in a slightly more open space. So maybe it's not having to like think about our CPU is not really having to think about stuff that's across the map. I don't know how true that is, but it seems to be that we do get slightly better performance on this map than the smaller map that's also featured in the classics 32v32 Conquest mode here. But obviously sitting right around 250 FPS on our average is an incredibly good place to be at. Game looks phenomenal. I mean, these Battlefield games, they always look really strong, so not a major surprise that this still looks good. I don't know if it really looks like miles better than what we were seeing in Battlefield 2042 when we checked that out. Yeah, right around 250 FPS, obviously an incredibly, competitive FPS, very, very high FPS. However, you know, we're not really getting to see the full strength of our 5090 here, just due to the fact that the utilization is not all the way up. So right around 8.5 gigabytes at max settings here. Let's see if turning on TAA and DLAA offers any sort of meaningful performance difference. All right, so first up, we'll go with wrong option there. We'll go with TAA. So this is just the lesser of the two when it comes to anti-aliasing, as far as just like how demanding it is. So we were sitting right around 250 FPS, and it does seem like the image is certainly less clear. I will say it is kind of a blurry looking image here. Actually, let's just make sure that that didn't. I know some of these games, sometimes they do weird things like mess with our resolution scale. No, it's still at 100. Yeah, I mean, TAA, we all know, like, it's not the best solution for anti-aliasing. It works on higher resolutions without really too much issue, but here at 1080p, you really want a better anti-aliasing solution if you can get it. And luckily for us, you know, we have a lot of GPU headroom to kind of play with. We are getting a slight performance decrease at times here. It doesn't seem super significant, but where we were pretty solidly right around 250, now we're at around 230. Now, you know, some of that obviously depends on what exactly is going on, like what effects and, you know, vehicles are near us, how many enemy players are near us, things like that. So it's hard to actually pinpoint exactly, but it seems like maybe a very, very slight dip in our FPS, if any, but you know, which is to be expected for TAA. So obviously here at TAA, not really where I'd like to be. It doesn't have those sharp jaggies, you know, like on the phone lines, or I guess these aren't phones, but these like thin lines like that. You know, there's certainly, as we are just being surrounded by snipers right now, but obviously not the best solution here, but definitely it's kind of achieving the anti-aliasing by essentially just blurring the pixels, which does not look super great. But let's check out DLAA and see if we're still able to get solid performance. So just turning our TAA over to DLAA, and we'll see if we can tell. Fortunately, our UI is kind of blocking, but I believe that says preset K. I'll zoom in. Maybe on the zoom in, actually, you might be able to tell a little better, but appears to be preset K, which is an incredibly good looking DLSS model. So certainly is going to result in a very, very clean picture here, which is what I am, there are snipers everywhere here, but that is certainly what I am experiencing here. Definitely a very, very, this is definitely out of the three that we were testing, definitely the best looking picture, no questions asked, at the cost of some very slight FPS, dropping down to around 210 right now, 224 on our average. So 1% lows are very, very solid at around 160, and yeah, game looks great. Obviously 1080p, you know, 5090 1080p should be able to just chew through any game, so it's not super surprising that we are in a CPU bound scenario. In fact, I'm expecting pretty much the same performance as we move up to 1440p, just due to the fact that we're not even maxing out the 5090 as is. But yeah, 1080p. The nice thing about 1080p is that if you have a high-end card, you know, especially a 5090 or even 5080, you can pretty much just play 1080p, crank every setting that you want. You don't even really have to think about it, and you're going to be getting a really solid experience, and that does seem to be the case here. All right, next up here, moving over to 1440p. Same settings here, we're still at max settings, and for our anti-aliasing, we're back on TAA. So TAA should look a bit better here now that we have more pixels to blur. You know, it is worth keeping in mind that I play these games while I'm benchmarking. I play on a pretty large monitor. I play on a 32-inch monitor, which is almost like, it's like nearly TV size. So, and I'm sitting close to it. So some of that stuff, you know, I don't imagine many people are playing on a 32-inch 1080p monitor. They're probably playing on like 22-inch, 24-inch 1080p monitor if you are at 1080p. So some of those complaints when it comes to the blurriness may not be as noticeable depending on your exact setup. But it does seem to be that we are still in a CPU-bound scenario, and we are getting essentially the same performance here at 1440p. No surprise. We are close now to the point where we're getting getting kind of butting right up against our, okay, I can't get that guy, but coming right up against our 5090. So we're not quite in a position where we're using all of our 5090. You can see our video memory is also increased slightly, now using about 8 gigabytes of video memory. Still well within, obviously, our incredibly large 32 gigabyte allotment that we have to kind of play with here. But still very, very similar performance, right around 230 with 150 now on our average, or on our 1% low. So definitely still really, really solid performance here. And honestly, TAA, in my opinion here, looks okay. There's not really, in my opinion, a huge need to go for anything more. In my opinion, this looks very sharp and doesn't look too blurry or anything like that. You know, as you bump up resolution, TAA typically does look better, and certainly seems to be the case here. But let's go ahead and see what DLAA looks like, and see if that should probably use up all of our 5090. We should be getting higher 5090 utilization. We'll see if that affects our performance to any meaningful degree. So just kind of clocking right around 230 on our average here with TAA. And again, here for anti-aliasing, just switching over to DLAA now. So this is now pretty much the best possible settings that you could run for 1440p. And we do see a very, very slight performance dip. Our GPU utilization actually seems to be around the same spot. You know, DLSS, it uses those tensor cores in our GPU. So basically, you can kind of think of it as like using a different part of the GPU. So it doesn't necessarily always impact the total utilization of the GPU the same way that, you know, just raw rasterization that actually results in the game picture, the way that that kind of changes our performance. So very, very similar performance here, slight dip, and honestly it does look better, but it's not miles better. So if you wanted those extra few frames, I mean, in my opinion, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes the difference between like 240 and 210. I don't think it's a huge difference, like actually playing the game. But if you want those extra frames, I don't think that you're really missing out on a ton as far as your picture quality goes. TAA is a totally fine solution from what I can see here at 1440p. So really solid performance, 1% low, still sitting incredibly respectably. You can see they're all kind of scaling together. So as our FPS dips slightly, so does our so do our 1% lows. So seems to be kind of going together as far as our general performance here. So still above 200 FPS, feels incredibly strong here, and not really even, you know, as far as like the actual experience that I'm having here, it feels essentially the same, if not just a little bit better for what our picture quality is. So 1440p, once again, no questions asked, totally well within the capabilities of the 5090. No surprises. And now last setting here is 4K on TAA for our anti-aliasing. I don't know if we're going to really see much benefit from using DLAA, but you can see, where can you see it? We're at 3840 by 2160 or 4K now. Still max settings, now using TAA. And this is where you start to see our FPS drop. So this is certainly now using, you can see, you kind of know for the 5090 at least, our total power that the card can typically draw is anywhere from around like 500 to, I've even seen it as high as like 550, 570. You can draw a lot of power, so it's not actually drawing as much power as some other titles, but our utilization does certainly seem to indicate that we are fully GPU bound now. That's also evident by the fact that our CPU utilization has dropped slightly, though 50% CPU utilization is relatively high compared to what you typically see in terrible aim there, but typically in a lot of other games you'll see much lower CPU utilization, like much more commonly in like the 30s. So certainly in a position where we are you know, more kind of using the card the way it's meant to be used, or using more of the card. So 4K here, max settings with TAA 150 on our average, 1% lows at 112. Totally great experience here. Now I could see some players or some people wanting a bit more in this position, so we will test out the DLSS, especially since we seemingly have that transformer model applied. And while in some games too, you can always go in and change whatever DLSS model that you're using. For a multiplayer title, you typically, or at least me personally, I don't like to change game files in multiplayer titles, especially ones like this with anti-cheat. So just due to the fact that it can certainly cause, the game to think that you're editing something that maybe you shouldn't. So it's nice to see that we already have a really strong model in the game. So around 150, I don't see the need for DLAA here personally. So actually, I'm not even really going to test it. 4K DLAA, in my opinion, is pretty much pointless and totally overkill. But you can probably imagine roughly the FPS that we'd get. But what I am a bit interested to see is some of our upscaling and seeing how that looks. So for our upscaling, obviously we're going to use DLSS. This takes over for our anti-aliasing solution, and we are going to come down to, we'll go down to balanced here, which balanced is certainly not a bad option when we're talking about when we know that we're on such a good model. So balanced here does now shoot us back up towards that 200 FPS mark, and is certainly still a really, really strong looking picture here. You can see at times some action going on will drop your FPS slightly, but still really, really solid performance here, and really happy, I will say, to see just that we are still getting a really good looking picture. This certainly appears to be that preset K that unfortunately the UI kind of blocks it, so we can't see it super clearly. There's probably some setting to remove the UI, but yeah, really, really solid performance here on this particular preset. So no issues whatsoever. Really, really solid. And because we are on preset K, let's just go ahead and go all the way for ultra performance. So this is now, and in fact, we can actually see here using our performance overlay what exactly we're scaling up from. So you can see we're actually scaling up from a 720p picture. And unfortunately, the game ended, but you can see there around 250 FPS. So we'll jump into the next game and see how this ultra performance mode looks. Unfortunately, this performance overlay, although it is very detailed, doesn't seem to actually show us the model that we're using. Just shows us that we're on DirectX 12 and scaling up from 720p. So we'll jump into the next match there and just see how high we can get. If we just wanted max settings, but we want to use that transformer model, we'll see how that looks. All right, so jumping in here, we'll go ahead and begin counting. And this is now with, fully utilizing that ultra performance mode for DLSS here. And this blows me away every time. Just the fact that this is a 720p image stretched out and upscaled to 4K, just how good this looks. It looks incredible. I mean, it looks so close to native 4K. It's a little bit softer, but really not much. It's still really, really good looking. So definitely nice to see that, this game being a multiplayer game is utilizing that preset K. There's so many multiplayer games that don't seem to really put a ton of effort into getting, really strong models of DLSS updated into their game. So strangely enough, it almost seems like they're more prevalent in single player titles, which obviously FPS in single player titles is nice, but not nearly as beneficial as when you're actually competing against other players. So right around 200 FPS, pretty much get to where we were at 1440p and 1080p by just using those upscalers, and really looks incredibly strong. So very, very happy with our performance here for sure. Anyways, guys, that's been Battlefield 6, the beta at least, on the 5090. No major surprise, but the 5090 is an absolute powerhouse of a card, and it is really nice to see that Battlefield, a game that, this previous entries all performed really well. This is still a really well-performing game, and this Frostbite engine, despite the fact that it looks so great and is so detailed, is able to have these huge worlds with a lot of destruction and everything. Just the fact that we are still able to get all of that and really solid frames with a lot of flexibility when it comes to both our upscaling as well as just such a great model. And even if you didn't want to use it, you just want to use no anti-aliasing or TAA as your solution, you're still going to be getting really solid performance here on the 5090. Obviously an expensive card, so shouldn't be super surprising, but still happy to see that. All right, guys, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.